Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
So much hatred. You're listening to the Tamar Yonah Show here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. We're going to be talking about hatred. Is the United States already in a civil war? Also, the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, and Israel. What progress has been made by those Abraham Accords? We'll also be talking a bit about the upcoming holiday of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of the Hebrew month of Av, which is a fast day. It is a day where we mourn the tragedies that have befallen Israel. We fast on that day. It also is all about hatred as well. And we're going to be talking about other things if we have time as well, like the coronavirus, vaccinating teens, etc. More information about that. So don't go anywhere. These are very heavy subjects, I know, but we have to deal with it because hatred is such a strong emotion and so destructive. And I'm sad to say, deadly. Hatred brings on war. It brings on death. It brings on needless suffering. You know, there's a story about how a father gave his sons each a whole bundle of sticks that were together, and he told them to take the sticks as a bundle and try to break it. And the first son couldn't do it. And then the second son couldn't do it. And then the third son couldn't do it. And then the fourth son couldn't do it. And then he took the bundle of sticks, each one of them by themselves, and gave each son a stick to break. And they were easily able to break that stick. And he taught them the lesson that when there is unity, when you are together, even if you don't all think the same, even if you're different personalities, but when you are united, nobody can break you. It's only when you're divided that you can easily be broken like a stick. And so we need to learn these lessons that we are different. That's why we're individuals. But we need to be united together in goodness, in morality, and what God wants us to be. We'll be right back.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
So much hatred. Is the U.S. already in a civil war? We are going to be speaking now with Dr. Mordechai Ben-Menachem. He is a researcher, former lecturer at Ben-Gurion University, and has authored over 80 books and 400 research papers on science, history, and more. He commentates on Mideast world issues. Welcome to the show, Dr. Mordechai Ben-Menachem.
Thank you.
All right. So, is the United States already in a civil war?
Well, that's an excellent question. Part of the answer to that is to answer it with a question, and that is, what exactly is the definition of a civil war? But let's go back just for a moment to a little bit in history. Just after the Second World War, the United States basically made a deal with the rest of the world. And that deal was called Bretton Woods. And in that deal, the United States said, we will fund a navy, and we will fund a massive military presence around the world. and in return, you will be on our side. In other words, we're going to bribe you, and we'll let you access our markets, which are big and relatively wealthy. They were the only wealthy market at the time. Today, there are other wealthy markets, of course. And in return, you'll vote for us and you'll be with us, and et cetera, et cetera. And that worked okay until about 1989, 1990, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and et cetera. And you had all throughout the so-called Cold War, which was anything but cold. And the basic problem that I'm showing here is that while the Cold War ended, the United States never changed course. Now, the United States is basically still in the mode of operation of the Cold War, but everything has changed since then. Everything has changed over the last 30 years. Everything. The democracy has changed, markets have changed, economics have changed, politics have changed. Everything has changed all over the world for everyone. And what's happening in the United States today, and as a direct result of what's happening in the United States, what's happening in the rest of the world, we've seen the United States just retreated ignominiously from Afghanistan. I mean, leaving tens of thousands of pieces of military equipment there because they were in a haste to get out, is a symptom of what's going on here. And so, on the one hand, the United States, we're seeing a tremendous breakdown of things today. We're seeing videos of the New York subway system was inundated underwater or flooded. Infrastructure all over the United States is breaking down and not being repaired. And the infrastructure that was built, for instance, the interstate highway system built by Eisenhower, is breaking down all over the United States and not being repaired. Bridges are unsafe. Tunnels are unsafe. Railroads don't really function well anymore. California attempted to build a high-speed rail, which works all over the world, even here in Little Israel, and they spent tens of billions of dollars, and it still doesn't work. So, projects that would clearly have been accomplished in ease of time and budget 30, 40 years ago are impossible projects today in the United States. The United States went to the moon 60 years ago, and today it's basically incapable of even flying astronauts to the International Space Station, which is also breaking down.
So how does all this tie in with a civil war in the United States?
Well, when society, when we see infrastructure breaking down, this is frequently, historically at least, this is a symbol of what's going on within society. So, in parallel with the infrastructure breaking down and everything like that, we're seeing, for instance, levels of societal violence which the human population has not seen since the European Dark Ages. We've never, for 1,000 years, we have not seen levels of violence in the streets as we're seeing in the United States today. And they're blaming it on COVID, which makes no sense whatsoever. It's just a ridiculous juxtaposition. It just doesn't work. Murders in New York alone, for instance, have risen by more than 40%. And I can go on with other numbers and statistics about other places in the United States, the levels of violence, not just homicide, but violent crimes of every type. Society is breaking down. We're seeing pictures of people defecating in public parks, publicly. Morality is breaking down. We're seeing the very basic concept of defund the police means that you no longer value the lives of people, of your fellow citizens. When violence is growing and you defund police, that means that basically you're demanding to increase the violence, because there's nothing to prevent violence any longer. So is the United States in a civil war? Well, I would say there are certainly no clear sides to it. One cannot say that there's, just to put it in the sense of the Civil War of 1860, there's certainly not a north-south. There's not an east-west. There are no clear sides here. But is civil unrest rising at a fantastic pace that we have not seen in well over 100 years in the United States? That is very clear. So civil society is breaking down. Whether or not that can be defined as a war, I think is still unclear, but the situation in the United States is precipitous and dangerous. Now remember, this is paralleled by an economic and demographic change. The world, basically the Western world, was powered economically for the past 80 years by what's called a consumption economy. That doesn't work anymore because basically the demographics don't work anymore. In other words, there are more old people who have fewer needs in terms of what they purchase. I'm an old guy. I don't need to purchase a lot of things. I buy food and I buy minimal things here and there, not because I'm cheap, but because I just don't have any need. I have everything that I need, basically. And that's the same for most people that are older than 50, and I'm far older than 50. And American society today, the median age is 56. That's old. They don't need much. So there are very few countries left in the so-called Western world that are still consumption-driven. Mexico is one of the few. Canada is not. Korea is not. Japan is not. Even China is not, and that's kind of pretty amazing. Demographics of almost every country in the world, mostly Israel is actually the only industrialized country in the world that has positive demographics. We still have young people here. No place else does.
That are having children, you mean?
Correct.
Okay.
That are having children, and that the general median age of the population is young enough to still be consumers and still be concerned with children.
Okay, but when I think of a civil war, I'm thinking of like the North against the South, or the Trump against the Trump supporters and conservatives against the liberal left. That's what I would think, because all these things that you mentioned, it would seem to me that this could happen in any country that's not on the verge of civil war, but is just under a lot of poverty. Like you look at Venezuela, you look at other countries that are just very poor. You're going to see corruption, you're going to see crime, you're going to see these things that you were describing.
Yes, but you won't necessarily see these enormous levels of violence, and that's the difference. You won't see societal breakdown.
Well, in Mexico,
the enormous usage of drugs, of suicides, of alcohol, of every kind of abuse, of domestic violence, of street violence, of societal violence. These are signs that the illness is much deeper.
Interesting.
So the question is the United States a civil war? I would say that I would probably answer that probably it already is, though sides have not been defined yet.
So if you don't have sides that are defined,
and there may still be a repair. I mean, the United States is an enormously resilient society, and it can fix itself.
I can agree that America is crumbling right now in many different ways. I mean, with gasoline prices going up and lumber and the inflation now, the terrible inflation that they're having, and the coronavirus effects, and then the stimulus checks is bankrupting the government even more and the people even more, and the defund the police and the violence. All of this could be the crumbling of a society in the United States. But as a civil war, that part I haven't really caught on to yet. But we have to go to a break. Maybe you can sum that up in the next segment. And then we'll, if we can, maybe we can talk a bit about hatred and Tisha B'Av, the holiday that's coming up on Sunday next week. And also the UAE Israel Abraham Accords. Where are they going right now? We'll be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Siminto from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Siminto, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we are talking about the hatred that exists in the world today. As Jewish people know, on Sunday next week, there's going to be the holiday of Tisha B'Av, and that is a holiday that we fast on because of the tragedies that have befallen upon the Jewish people, the loss of our temples and other tragedies in our history. It's a day of fasting and mourning, and it also commemorates the baseless hatred that some Jews had for other Jews even. So hatred, we know, is a very destructive force. It's a very deadly force as well, and it could lead to war. And we're talking now with Dr. Mordechai Ben-Menachem, and he's talking to us about what's happening in the United States with the hatred there, the differences of opinions on what morality is, on what enlightenment is. You know, I would say that we're in the dark, spiritually at least, we're in the dark ages, but the liberal left call it enlightenment. So I guess there's delineated sides there. Where would you like to take us, Dr. Mordechai Ben-Menachem?
I think you phrased that very well. Just a comment on your question of dark or enlightenment. And I would say that we're all aware of the history of the European Enlightenment era, but the European Enlightenment was based upon predatory Europe going out to the rest of the world, stealing their resources at fantastic rates, and in the process, just in the 19th century alone, Europeans killed well over 100 million people around the world for their enlightenment. So yes, you're right. It's partly dark and it's partly enlightenment, and they mix together, and they always have. But the issue that you want to talk about, and you're right, is baseless hatred. I think the first comment that should be made is that you phrased it well. Tisha B'Av, the ninth day of the month of Av, is the date when both temples were destroyed, which sort of, at very least, infers that the date is not a random date. Two extraordinary events in human history occurring on the same date surely says to anyone that it's far from simply a random coincidence. And of course, many other things occurred on that date as well. We'll not go into that at the moment, but the point of the discussion is the baseless hatred, and we're seeing that today throughout America. We're seeing that today in Europe. We're seeing that today basically almost all over the world. There are very few places today that are calm. Mostly only islands of calmness in the midst of a lot of conflict all around the world of many different types, and people that make a living, if I can call it that, make a deading perhaps, out of taking advantage of the various conflicts going on. And that's we need to remember that one of the largest industries in the world today is illicit drugs, the illicit drug trade, which shouldn't really be called drugs because they're poisons. but these substances are traded by people who basically don't even have the basic humanity to care that they're killing babies, and they're killing children, they're killing men and women all around the world just for their own egotism. And this is baseless hatred. This is something which makes the world a much worse place. So any of these people involved in these trades, and of course drugs is not the only issue, there are many others as well, but any of the people involved in these trades are people that literally live in order to make the world a much less pleasant and a much worse place to live. It's kind of a horrible thing to say, isn't it?
Indeed. So with all the hatred that we've been talking about, plus more that we've learned in history, we need to learn a lesson. We know that in Judaism, they say that until we do a tikkun, a fixing, we're going to keep having the same holiday, right, over and over. And only when we learn the lesson of baseless hatred and not to have that, instead to have what's called ahavat chinam, to have basically baseless love for you just love your fellow human being. We need to learn this lesson. So you speaking now as a rabbi, not just as a scientist or historian, what do we need to do?
Well, you phrased that well, but we need to understand something. Baseless love is not something which you manage to do because you talk about it. In other words, saying that, okay, yes, I'm going to love my neighbor as in myself, and et cetera, and all these other things, this doesn't work. You have to actually do it, not just talk about it. So, and I'm not saying anything right now. I will, maybe I will later, but I'm not saying anything about this religion or that religion. But if a person comes and says my religion is perfect and anybody of any other religion therefore needs to be punished, then again, you are a person that is devoting your life to making the world a less perfect place, a less desirable place to live, a less desirable time to live in this place. I don't care what religion you are. You talk about that. Judaism, for instance, as a matter of basic principle, never says that, for instance, someone who is not Jewish is less good. We talk about, for instance, the difference in Judaism between a Kohen, a Levi, and a Yisrael. In other words, we have divisions. People can be different. That's fine. Different does not mean ranking. So we can say that, for instance, a person who was unaware of God at all has some sort of a blemish on his soul. But that doesn't mean the person is not a person. It doesn't mean the person cannot attempt to be a good person. Maybe he doesn't have the proper guides for it.
Well, we all have to remember that we are all brothers and sisters because we all stem from Noah, and before that, from Adam and Eve. We're all connected. We're all brothers and sisters.
Absolutely correct. And I would even go one step farther, that most people are not aware of this, but Noah was descended from one son of Adam and Eve, and his wife was descended from the other son, from Cain. And so, literally, what you said is exactly true. There are not two kinds of people in the world. We are all intimately related, and all of us have both the positive inclinations and the negative inclinations, and we all need to learn to leverage them in the optimal manner. Negative inclinations are not necessarily evil. That's why I use the word negative and not evil.
So in the go ahead.
In Hebrew, we don't use it that way. We say there are negative inclinations that can be leveraged for the good.
So in the last 2 minutes that we have for this segment, give us something practical that when someone all of a sudden should feel, God forbid, hatred for their fellow human being, What do they need to do in order to get rid of that? Thinking, oh my gosh, I just thought really bad about this person, and I know I'm not supposed to do that. What is an exercise, or what can they do in order to prevent that from happening?
We had a rabbi by the name of Ramchal, Rabbi Lusato.
Right.
And he asked that question, and he wrote about it extensively, and it's an excellent question. It's a hard question. And the first answer to that is, first of all, sit down in a quiet place and think about what you just said to yourself. Think about that. Think about it, really. Why are you feeling this hatred for this person? Is it justified? Sometimes it can be justified. I mean, I mentioned to you before we came on the show that I saw a video about the capture of Eichmann. Eichmann was a horrible monster. There's no reason not to hate a horrible monster like that. There's no reason not to hate people that did terrible things. Hatred by itself is not necessarily evil. It's how you use it. That's why I said there are negative and there are positive. How do we funnel them? How do we channel them? How do we use them? Now that doesn't mean that if you hate somebody, you need to be violent towards them. That should never happen. But you can go to somebody and say, I really dislike you. Can we talk about it? Or you can say, I can't abide this person, and I can't. I can't handle it. I have a weakness. I know that I have a weakness, so I'll avoid this person. But the first aspect is sit down with yourself. If you want to call it meditation, call it that. If you want to call it just deeply thinking about it, look within your own heart. Look within yourself and say, can I look at this unemotionally, objectively? Can I control my emotions?
Well, that's something that a lot of people can't do today, unfortunately. And that's, I think, just a sign of immaturity, and people really need to, just simply grow up. But I'll tell you what I do in the few seconds that we have, and that is that I look at and I think, wow, that's my brother. He is me and I am him. How can I hate him? Because if I hate him, I'm hating myself. It's like a finger the fingers hating the toes. Oh, the fingers say, I can write piano concertos and I can write poetry, and look at those smelly, stubby toes on the foot. And then it takes a hammer and hits it. Does that make any sense? Of course not, because we're part of the same body. We're one. And so whenever, a thought, God forbid, could come up in my head, not often anymore because I've pretty well trained myself to do this. And then as I think, this is me. Why should I hate myself? It doesn't make sense. We're all brothers and sisters. We're all connected. God loves this person. He put this person on the earth for a certain reason. Who am I to hate that person? All right, we're going to be right back. We'll be right back.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello, I am Walter Bingham. If you want to hear the news behind the news and the true perspective on world affairs, then the Walter Bingham File is the program for you. We bring you interviews with the movers and shakers, political commentaries, and on-the-spot reports of events as they happen. All here every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Israel time, 9 a.m. Eastern time. And it's all archived on our website. Make it a date.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. We're talking about hatred and how destructive it is. And some good news is that though there has been hatred for decades and decades and decades between the Arab nations and Israel, we have, under the Trump administration, the Abraham Accords that came about with the UAE and Israel cooperating together now, visiting each other's countries. We're seeing that hatred going. It is a wonderful thing. But now Biden is in charge, and though Biden, this is my opinion, talks it up saying that, yes, it's a positive thing, it's to my understanding that he's not funding these types of fostering goodwill between the nations anymore, which would be in the interest of the United States, because when there's peace in the Middle East, the prices of oil could go down, etc. You don't want to have war in places like that. It's hard to transport things. And so what has been the progress since Biden took office, and since Israel and the UAE and other Bahrain, etc., have now much better relations between each other? Dr. Mordechai Ben-Menachem, please.
Yeah, it's an excellent topic, particularly after speaking about Tisha B'Av, because we're talking about Tisha B'Av talks about baseless hatred, and here along came the sovereigns of the United Arab Emirates. Remember, the United Arab Emirates is exactly what its name says. There are 7 emirates that united and became one nation. That in itself is a brilliant thing, because it's unprecedented in world history. It's unprecedented in Islamic history, and they've proven themselves to be really extraordinary on the world stage. And they understood. I don't know if it was a process that took long, or if it was how much it was helped by Trump. I don't know about what went on behind the scenes, and I don't know what went on in their hearts. But they understood that their hatred was baseless, which is exactly what we were talking about in the previous segment. And they said, okay, let's fix this. And just to give you a few numbers to show how much it has been fixed, there have been hundreds of thousands of visitors in both directions, of Emiratis visiting Israel and of Israelis visiting the Emirates. Hundreds of thousands. There have been tens of billions of dollars that have already exchanged hands in investments, in business dealings, and tens of billions of dollars. We're talking about under a year. This is an extraordinary change in such a short period of time. We're talking about now building mega projects in terms of infrastructure, which will basically change the way the world transports things. Until now, everything has been to get from the east to Europe had to go through the Suez Canal. Well, now we're talking about a trans-Israeli railroad. We're talking about a reactivating and expanding the oil pipeline. We're talking about another railroad to go from the Emirates through Saudi Arabia and through Jordan towards Haifa, and connecting that up. So, I mean, we're talking about a total change, not just between the two countries, not even just, pardon the expression, in the region, but a change which is affecting the entire world. This agreement, and I've already mentioned the Emirates, it's true as well with Morocco, and it's true as well with Bahrain. Sudan is moving much more slowly, but they're moving along as well. And those are the 4 signatories to the Abraham Accords. But the Emiratis have proven themselves to be absolutely extraordinary, far-seeing, strategic thinkers, and they're doing work which is just unbelievable. I'll mention one other thing before I end this bit about the Emirates here, is that what we appear to be seeing, and I want to phrase this very carefully, there are several islands south of the Arabian Peninsula, and there appear to be military cooperation of some sort, maybe just in the area of intelligence gathering. It's unclear at this point, between the Emirates, who control these islands, and Israel, to eventually find a solution to this terrible war in Yemen. So we're talking about an enormous change throughout the region, change which is unprecedented in 1,000 years. And if there's anything that can be the opposite of baseless hatred, it's the Abraham Accords. It's absolutely amazing.
So now, maybe you can explain to us what Biden's stance on everything, or I should say, the people who are controlling Biden.
I don't know if Biden. I think you phrased it correctly. I don't think Biden thinks. I don't think he has any idea of what's going on, anything other than his cue cards. But this redhead, what's her name? Psaki?
Yeah, the spokesperson.
She claimed just recently that they consider the Abraham Accords to be dead on arrival. That was her phrasing, dead on arrival. So the best thing you can say about the Biden administration is that they have no clue about even basic facts. They just don't know what's going on. And so, yes, you were right with your comment before that there was a fund as part of the Abraham Accords. The Biden administration has retracted itself from that fund. There were other parts to the Accords, which included, for instance, the supply of certain weapon systems to the Emirates so that they can defend themselves against Iran. The Biden administration retreated from that. Basically, the Biden administration is doing everything it can to foment war.
And why? Tell our listeners why.
Because that's what the Democrats do. The Democrats always... We need to understand something very basic. Franklin Roosevelt was probably a consummate genius. He understood something very basic. And the basic concept was, if you make your people dependent upon you, you will have them as your voters forever. And so he created basically the so-called Great Depression in order to create this dependency. Lyndon Johnson was his natural successor, and he continued the laws of dependency. Clinton was too egotistical to do anything either way, but Obama, while not as good at that as Johnson and Roosevelt, also created dependencies. If you create dependencies, then people need to vote for you. So if you create wars, then you are creating dependencies. You're creating a situation where people are no longer have freedom of action. Things are happening around them that they cannot control. And if you can control these wars, you can control the populations. And so that's what the Democrats do. They've always done that. Every Democratic administration, basically, since the Democratic Party was founded, has created wars. They always do.
But the Republicans create wars. They created wars as well.
Not really. Trump didn't create a single war.
Not Trump, but go back in history. What was it with the Vietnam War? Wasn't that with Kennedy or?
Johnson started the war, and Nixon got the end of the war. So Johnson was.
Kennedy was Democrat,
Nixon
right?
was Republican. So basically, wars are started by Democrats and ended by Republicans. That's sort of more or less the history.
And then there was also Bush who took us into Iraqi freedom. So Bush was a Republican.
He had excellent intentions and a terrible execution.
You really think he had good intentions?
Yes, I think on a basic moral level, I think he was basically a good person who just was totally out of his depth and had no idea.
I don't think so at all. No, I don't think so at all. First of all, he went in under the pretense that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And I remember Colin Powell I think it was the Congress, trying to show the proof, and I was thinking that's not proof. And anyway, it was Bin Laden that attacked the United States on September 11th. It wasn't Saddam Hussein. But then you go look at history and you see Saddam Hussein was gonna drop the dollar for trading, which was gonna hit the dollar. So he goes in there and they call it Operation Iraqi Freedom, like they really cared about the freedom of the Iraqi people. Come on. No. Then we saw later on about that. He went into Afghanistan and they were taking over the poppy fields, and the U.S. Military was guarding the drug runners there to be able to grow their poppy, and the CIA was taking money from that to fund their things. This was all dirty stuff.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, nothing is.
I think both sides do it. I think both sides of power do it. I don't know. That's just me.
Zeros and ones here.
All right. Well, we have to go. We have 10 seconds. You want to leave us with something really fast? One sentence?
One sentence. Everybody really needs to think about the concept of baseless hatred. You can hate somebody, but don't allow yourself to go to baseless hatred. Hate somebody who's a monster, who's evil,
like
who's
Eichmann.
Clearly evil.
A murderer, somebody that needs to be, that you hate what they're doing and it's unjust and you have to bring justice to the world. All right, we will leave it right there. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Thank you, Dr. Mordechai Ben-Menachem. And we will be back for my next show.
Thank you.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling for the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.